Welcome to Handmade Happenings. I'm Marissa. Today I'm making a walk-in closet for my dollhouse. And since I don't have any open space in my dollhouse, I'm making some by creating a stacking room, which will go on top of my interchangeable room, which I made in a previous video. This is something I've considered doing for a while, but I've never done it because this room is actually right under a window and there's only about 10 3/4 inches of room between the top of my first room and the window ledge. But since the closet is more about me needing easily accessible clothes storage than using it for the dolls, it really doesn't matter that it's a little short. I'm using foam board from Dollar Tree and hot glue for this project. So the first thing I did was make the room, measure the size of the room that I'm stacking on. This is best done by measuring the base because it's a more accurate measurement than up top because sometimes it warps at the top a little. My room is 23 by 7 3/8 inches. So I cut a rectangle of foam board to that size for the floor of my new room. I placed the floor on top of the room to check the size and test the stability. The back and sides were pretty stable because they are directly on top of the walls of the lower room. But the closer you get to the middle of that front edge, the flimsier it got. So to reinforce it, I cut a 1 by 22 inch piece, which I glued to the bottom front edge of the floor, leaving a 1/2 inch gap on either side to allow room for the walls. To hold the room in place once it's stacked, I decided to add a lip around the edges of the floor. So I cut a piece 2 by 23 inches, that's the length of the floor, marked it at 1 inch, and then glued it to the back edge of the floor along that line. Cut 2 more strips to the length of the 4 sides, and you'll have to measure this after you've already attached the back piece because you need to factor in the thickness of that piece. And then I glued them to the sides again at 1 inch. And what this gives me is a floor with a lip above it and one below it. I decided not to bother with walls, but you could put them in at this point. They would be glued on top of the floor, which is what I prefer to do anyway, and what I would do if this gets moved out from under the window. Now for the furniture, my plan for this was to have wardrobes along the back wall, and I didn't want one big one. I preferred to have it in separate pieces. That way I can pull one out as needed if I'm trying to organize things or something like that. And the first thing I did was put the floor back onto the room and into the corner so I could measure the height for my wardrobes. The available space was about 10 1/2 inches. And I started by cutting one large panel for the back of the wardrobes. This was 10 1/4 inches by 22 1/2 inches, which is a little smaller than the size I have available to allow margin for error. Now I cut the board into 4 pieces. I think I took 5 or 6 inches off of either end and then cut the middle piece in half. And I numbered the pieces on the back so that they stayed in the same order that they had originally been cut in. For the sides of the wardrobes, I needed 8 pieces, 2 for each one. Fortunately, they're all the same size, which is the height of the pieces, in my case 10 1/4 inches, by the desired depth, and I decided on 3 inches. Once the side pieces were cut, I marked the location of where the hanging rods would go. So they are centered on the short side and then 1/2 inch away from that top edge. Though I think before I put them in, I did end up moving this mark down a little lower. For the 2 outer wardrobes, I wanted to add a drawer at the bottom, so I lined up the side and back pieces of each one and drew a line 2 1/2 inches from the bottom edge along all of the pieces. To assemble each wardrobe, I started by gluing one side to the back. I then stacked the other side wall on top and measured the remaining width of the back panel. Then I cut the top, bottom, and shelf panels where applicable to that measurement, the remaining back width, by 3 inches, which is the depth of my side pieces. To make hanging rods, I cut paper to the same remaining back panel width, then applied stick glue to one side and rolled it into a tube. I made brackets to hold the rods by cutting approximately 1 inch squares and removing a notch at the top large enough to hold the rod. Next, glue the brackets to the inside of the side walls, making sure the notches line up. And on one of the wardrobes, I did do a second rod to have more storage for hanging shorter items. Now I glued the top and bottom pieces into the wardrobes, as well as the shelf pieces along the line that I drew in earlier. Finally, glue on the remaining side piece. And lastly, set in the hanging rod. I chose not to glue them in because they didn't need it with those brackets holding them in place. And it adds a little flexibility because I can remove the lower rod of the wardrobe that has 2 tiers if I need to hang longer items. I made drawers for the end units using cardstock. To do this, determine the width, length, and height of the drawers. Double the height and add that number to both the length and the width. Then cut a piece of cardstock out to that size. Measure from one edge of your cardstock in the amount that is the height of your drawer and score there. Repeat on all 4 sides. This should give you squares in all 4 corners. Cut along one line in each corner to create a tab. Fold the sides up and glue the tabs in place. For the hangers, I started by creating a pattern. Draw a 3-inch line and then mark the center. Then measure 1 inch up above the center, place a mark there, and then measure up another 1/2 inch and place a mark there. Take some jewelry wire and curve the end. Then position the curve at the top marking. Let the wire come straight down to the next mark. Then turn the wire so it angles to one of the side marks. Curve the wire again and send it straight across to the final mark. Turn there and go back up to the center. Cut the wire a little past the center and then bend it closed around the base of the hook. This finished room fits really well in my space, and now my dolls have more closet than they have clothes. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you'll join me next time for another handmade happening.